Hello, YouTube, and welcome back to the Christian Perspectives 2004 YouTube channel. I am Jacob, and today we're going to be talking about NDEs and Jesus. And if you don't know what NDEs are, they are code name for near-death experiences. People that are clinically dead, but they come back. And for many, many years, and really for many, many decades, we have heard about NDEs all over the world, with many of them sounding very similar, and particularly them featuring Jesus and heaven in these NDEs. And there have been many explanations that people have tried to give NDEs over the years. Skeptics will claim that it's the mind in almost a dreamlike state. Skeptics will argue that, the mind is just trying to produce something to make it feel good, or that it recognizes in the last moments of life. Some may argue that it's a cultural thing. Some may argue it's like an illusion. There are many arguments. Most of the arguments against NDEs typically come from skeptics, but when you really look into it, the NDEs and the connections to Jesus, now Jesus has been the only figure seen in these near-death experiences, and the bright light that is said to be irradiating from him, and the feeling of overwhelming love and peace, and the way he speaks just in calmness but also with great authority. How so many people have shared these stories now. Many of them vary, but many of them are similar, but all have the central message, which is the same message we see in the four Gospels, which is follow Jesus. Love God and love one another, the true meaning to life. And, skeptics, as I said, they want to argue about NDEs and say that, NDEs is just the mind coming up with stuff during the last moments of death to comfort the person that's about to leave the world. But the problem with that argument is that science has studied the brain of a dying individual, of a practically dead individual. It cannot produce dreams. While the brain most definitely is a very complex part of the body, however, during death, the brain cannot produce dreams because the brain is basically shut off. The brain is, not functioning properly. There's not enough brain waves and strength in that brain to be able to create any imagery or images that one person can see. And it's also very important to note that these NDEs are not hazy visions, but rather people talk about being transported to an entirely different location. You have some talking about seeing a bright light and seeing the beauty of heaven and seeing Jesus. Others talk about, being in the lake of fire and outer darkness and in hell, but then they ultimately see the bright light and they're saved by Jesus. You hear many, many accounts like these from NDEs, and these are full-blown conversations that people are having with loved ones, and having with Jesus, and full-blown experiences that a dying brain could not ever create. It is impossible. And people talk about how they're again projected into a whole nother location. So the whole argument of the dream state like nature, along with the mix of you know the claims of, I'm blanking on what it is, but the claims of, oh, it's just, your mind comforting you before your death, just simply don't line up with what science says about the brain during death. The brain, even when it's fully healthy, cannot fully lead you into a whole nother location, let alone be able to do that when you're dying. And for people to be dying and basically clinically dead, and yet to have these experiences when they are clinically dead, and the brain does not have the power to create these, it's something that's beyond human understanding that is happening, where these people are transported and seeing Jesus and having conversations with him and feeling his overwhelming love and peace and joy and authority. And then how when he tells them to come back, to wake up, they wake up and they get up and they live and they're okay. You hear about this all the time. You hear it so much all over the world, and some will argue about culture, that maybe the culture is the reason why certain figures are seen. But the problem is, whenever you hear about someone seeing Buddha or Muhammad in these NDEs, they're usually seen in negative connotations. They are usually seen in hell. Whereas Jesus, again, is always depicted with a bright light around him, with overwhelming love and peace exonerating from him. So, in truth, NDEs is really the biggest example of the reliability of Christ in the modern world, because so many people, thousands, have had near-death experiences and have seen heaven, have seen Jesus, have directly talked to Jesus in these experiences. And there's so many people that have put their faith in Christ because of these NDEs. And science has said time and time again that they cannot explain these events because the brain just simply does not have the ability to project these things that these people are seeing when they're clinically dead. And the brain don't even have the power to depict what they're seeing even when they're not clinically dead. So clearly, the skeptic argument against NDEs simply does not hold up when you use science. And it's kind of ironic when you think about it. If you know, you know. So it's pretty clear that when people have near-death experiences and they all talk about seeing Jesus, not Muhammad, not Krishna, not Buddha, in these near-death experiences, people always talk about seeing Jesus. That is the biggest stamp of proof and of evidence that Jesus Christ is indeed the eternal living God, and that he is indeed 110,000% everything he said he was, the truth, the way, and the life. So really, the biggest apologetic for us followers of Jesus today, and that even in our deepest, darkest moments, even during our times of doubt and struggle, may we never forget the testimonies of thousands of people who have had near-death experiences, who saw Jesus, who saw heaven. And may we all remember that we too will one day see Jesus in all his glory, in his kingdom of heaven. And may we never forget that it is through his death on the cross that we find salvation for our sin. Christ died for us. Now we must live for him. Thank you all for watching, and God bless.